Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Forgione. Hopefully, you guys are doing okay. Having a decent first week back of. I know it's been just chaotic with everybody. I think right now, but hopefully, you guys are doing okay. Today, I want to do another protectionism video. Last time, we talked about a few different arguments in favor of protectionism. We talked about dumping and preventing dumping. We talked a little bit about protecting culture, and then we talked about essentially not exploiting foreign workers, that those were some of the reasons that somebody might be in favor of protectionism. I did want to address one thing real quick on the anti-dumping argument. A couple of people had said, well, wait, if free trade, and trade relationships basically allow people that are trying to do good, that are trying to help other countries, it actually can kind of hurt them. What can we do to help other countries where we don't just dump unwanted goods? One of the things that, if anyone is interested in social entrepreneurship, it's one of the fastest growing areas of our economy, one of the fastest growing majors in the U.S. In fact, I believe it's either Alabama or Auburn. One of the two state universities in Alabama has a really good program in that. But basically, eventually working with nonprofits and trying to run nonprofits. One of the things that they've come out with, and it makes a lot of sense, is that if you're going to work in an area like, say, Haiti, if you're working with an organization that wants to help out with, let's say, clean water in Haiti, what you want to do to really help them, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to pay a bunch of Americans to go down there and build these wells and build these purification plants or whatever it might be. What you're better off doing is taking a couple of people from the nonprofit in the U.S., going down there to sort of supervise and oversee a project, but actually paying Haitian workers and Haitian businesses to build whatever it is that you need to build, because that way the money is flowing into the Haitian economy. They're getting work, they're getting jobs, but you're also still getting the end goal of water purification and water plants down there. So that's kind of what the end goal should be, or the process should be. Okay, today we're going to talk about a few more arguments in favor of protectionism. We'll kind of mix it up between moral and economic arguments, although a couple of the economic arguments definitely have some holes in them, but we'll kind of talk about those here in a little bit as well. All right, so first off, what I want to touch on today is a moral argument, which is essentially not corrupting foreign policy, that we don't want to corrupt our foreign policy. You say, well, wait, what does protectionism have to do with that, or what does trade have to do with corrupting foreign policy? All right, so back about 15 years ago, there was this movement called Free Darfur, or Save Darfur. And what was happening, Darfur was an area in the Sudan where there was quite literally a genocide going on there. The reason that we were not getting involved here in the United States, we say, wow, there's a genocide, why are we not going over there and intervening? The reason we weren't intervening was that the Sudan had a relationship with China. They had a trade relationship there where the Sudan was essentially producing oil and giving that oil to China in their trade relationship. Now, China at the time was financing a lot of the United States borrowing. A lot of the U.S. national debt was coming from Chinese borrowers and from the Chinese government specifically. So we did not want to jeopardize our relationship with China and them continuing to finance our debt by going over there and doing something to basically anger the Sudanese government. So we essentially kind of buried our heads in the sand and stayed out of it. That's an issue. Certainly, we can kind of understand where maybe our foreign policy got a little bit corrupted there by having a trade relationship. So again, a moral argument, but still a fairly compelling one. Now, another argument that you hear a lot of with regard to protectionism is that if you don't trade with other countries, then you can protect your sunset industries. Okay, you can protect your sunset industries. A sunset industry is essentially an industry that is going away. It's a dying industry. So if we think about in the U.S. right now, I would argue that DVDs are probably a dying industry right now because of streaming video, that most people are going with streaming video, streaming services. And so I would think that DVDs are for the most part kind of a dying industry. So, all right, if we don't trade, if we don't, work with other countries, it sort of slows that timeline down. We can kind of protect the sunset industry and protect our sunset workers in those industries. So if you think manufacturing, that so often because of trade, we ship our manufacturing jobs overseas into the other countries. Okay, we can protect those workers and protect them here if we don't trade, if we don't ship those jobs overseas. The flip side to that is that eventually these jobs are going to go away no matter what due to technology. Eventually, jobs in low skilled areas eventually go away. Protectionism slows that process, and so that may be there may be some merit in this, that at least we get these people through to retirement, at least we get them through to to help their families before those jobs go away. But eventually these jobs are going to go away, and so there's always a little bit of a trade-off there with, is this worth it? Is it worth it to protect these sunset industries that are eventually going to go away anyway by refusing to trade? Okay, another one that is economically pretty sound actually is the same thing, protecting or safeguarding what we call infant industries. So if a sunset industry is one in which it's dying, it's going away, an infant industry is one that's just starting, it's one that's just kind of coming out. And this is actually a pretty economically valid argument here, because the thought is, let's not trade until we know that we are the best at producing it, until we know that we have a comparative advantage in this good. So if you go back to very, very early in the school year when we were doing comparative and absolute advantage, we said that a country would want to specialize in whatever good they had they had the comparative advantage in. And so that's really what this is about, is, hey, let's keep everything to ourselves. Let's not trade right away. Let's make sure we're the best at it before we open things up to the market. Let's only trade once we know we're the best at a particular thing. So if we think about right now, self-driving cars, that's an area that the U.S. is in sort of a race with China, Japan, and a couple of other nations right now, Germany, to try to come out with who's going to have the best self-driving cars. So we're in that race right now. Google and Apple are both playing a major role in that race. And so you can make an argument, a pretty fair argument, that, hey, we shouldn't, trade some of this away or trade some of this technology away where another country could end up being better at it. We should maybe safeguard this and protect it until we're the best at it, and only then start trading with other nations with regard to those industries. And then lastly, and it's a valid reason, it's not a particularly, for lack of a better term, sexy or exciting reason, but it is a valid reason, is what's called balance of payments. Now, the balance of payments is an accounting term, and we're going to get there. As you might imagine, I didn't want to hit you guys with a bunch of accounting stuff when you first got back from this crazy, chaotic coronavirus. It wasn't like, hey, let's do some YouTube videos on accounting. Let's get really pumped up with that, right? But it is something we are going to eventually have to cover. Balance of payments essentially is how we use accounting when we have trade, when we have imports and exports, how we essentially account for those. When we have free trade, it is very likely that we're going to have what's called a trade deficit. That in terms of accounting, we're going to have imports, or the value of imports is going to exceed the value of exports. You may say, all right, we get that. Why is that a problem? Well, whenever you have imports exceeding exports, aside from the fact that your net exports are down, that can have a negative impact on your aggregate demand and on your real GDP. The other major issue is how we correct those oftentimes is basically by paying the other country, by paying a country that we're in trade relationship with cash. And what that does, when a government pays another country cash to sort of fix these import versus export balances, what that does is it opens us up to basically make our national debt greater. So we call this a lot of times the twin deficits, okay? And I don't know exactly how the cameras got this here, so I don't know, I don't want to write this off screen, but the twin deficits. Twin deficits are trade deficit, which is what we're referring to here with the balance of payments, imports versus exports. And then there is a budgetary deficit, which is taxes versus spending. There are certain times where we know 100% we're going to be in a budgetary deficit, like right now, because of the stimulus, because of spending $2 trillion to be able to help people during this crisis, this pandemic. Not just the U.S., but pretty much all countries or most Western nations are going to go into budgetary deficits because this is a major crisis, both from a health standpoint and from an economic standpoint. We're going to spend a lot of money to try to help people out. So it's not saying deficits are always bad, but in the long run, when you have a lot of debt, that makes it more difficult to finance things like and to pay for things like education, infrastructure. We spend a lot more money on our interest payments as opposed to actually paying for goods and services. So with balance of payments, we can have essentially when imports are greater than exports, that creates a lot of times a twin deficit or a budgetary deficit as well. And both of those things, both the debt and the trade deficit, both can negatively impact our aggregate demand and our real GDP. So I'm going to leave off there. Hopefully that makes sense. It's really kind of difficult doing this without the interplay of you guys asking questions. But if you have questions, please leave them in the comments. I'll try to get back with you. I'm also going to try and set up a Google Meet at some point real soon so we can kind of go through and you guys can ask questions on these things. But for right now, that's it. I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you all, and we'll talk to you later.